The first sign that something was wrong was the change in her routine. Evelyn was always a creature of habit, up by 7, coffee brewing, the same old NPR station humming softly through the kitchen. We'd sit together most mornings, even if just for a few minutes, talking about what lay ahead in our day. We'd been married for 28 years, raised 2 kids, and settled into a comfortable rhythm. But 3 months ago, everything shifted, though I didn't realize it right away. It started small. She'd wake up earlier, leave before I even made it downstairs. Her excuses were always the same: early shift at the hospital, or meeting a colleague for breakfast. Evelyn was a nurse, so I never thought to question it. Long shifts, unpredictable hours, it came with the job. But then she began coming home later too. The evening dinners we used to share became less frequent, and when I'd ask her how her day went, she'd shrug it off with one-word answers or vague descriptions. I told myself I was imagining it at first. We'd been together so long. Maybe this was just the natural ebb and flow of marriage after so many years. People change, right? They get busy, life takes over. But then I started noticing other things. The way her phone was suddenly glued to her hand, always face down on the table, silenced. The way she smiled a little too brightly at texts she wouldn't let me see. And the perfume, that damn perfume. She'd never worn anything heavy or floral, but lately there was this scent that clung to her. Something sweet and new, unfamiliar. It wasn't hers, and I knew it. I'm not a man prone to suspicion, but when your gut starts twisting in knots every time you look at your wife, it's hard to ignore. One night after she'd gone to bed early, I sat downstairs nursing a drink and staring at her phone, sitting innocently on the kitchen counter. She never used to hide it from me, but lately it felt like she was always one step ahead, never leaving it where I could just casually glance at it. My hands were sweating as I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like a teenager about to do something forbidden, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know. I needed to put the growing dread in my gut to rest. The phone was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. We didn't keep secrets, or at least we hadn't before. The moment I unlocked the phone, I was overwhelmed by a wave of guilt. Was I overreacting? Was I about to invade her privacy for no reason? But that feeling disappeared when I opened her messages. At first, it was all normal. Texts from friends, colleagues, family members. Even some messages from our kids. But then I saw the thread, no name, just a number. My stomach dropped. The messages were recent, just from the past few days. I opened it, scrolling through the exchange, my heart sinking with each line I read. "I miss you, can't wait to see you tomorrow." "Same, today felt too short, when can we meet again?" "Soon, just have to keep things quiet." It was all there, in black and white. The little moments of intimacy she shared with someone else, someone who wasn't me. I scrolled further, my breath catching in my throat as the messages became more explicit. They weren't just meeting for coffee. This wasn't some innocent flirtation. My wife was having an affair. I dropped the phone onto the table, as if it had burned me, my hands shaking. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the betrayal sinking in. Evelyn, the woman I had loved for nearly 3 decades, the mother of my children, had been lying to me. She was with someone else. But who? I couldn't just leave it at that. I needed answers. The texts were careful, no names, no specifics. But then I remembered something. A few weeks ago, she had mentioned meeting up with a new colleague from work, a man who had just started in her unit. "A nice guy," she'd said. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now his name rang in my ears like a bell. David. I had never met him, but now, the possibility that he was the man behind those messages felt like a lead weight in my chest. Was it him? Was he the one my wife was sneaking off to meet? The thought of it made me sick, but I couldn't be sure. Not yet. I put the phone down and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? Confront her? Demand answers? Part of me wanted to march upstairs, wake her up, and demand to know the truth. But another part of me was terrified of what she'd say, terrified of what this would mean for us. Instead, I stayed there, staring at the phone, the reality of it all crashing down on me. Evelyn wasn't just pulling away. She was actively hiding a part of her life from me, a part she had given to someone else. And I had no idea how long it had been going on. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, my back turned to her, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, wondering how many times she had lied to me, how many times she had gone off to be with him while I sat at home, none the wiser. The next morning I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. I needed more. I needed to know for sure who this man was and how deep the betrayal ran. Maybe it was David. Maybe it wasn't. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. Evelyn moved around the kitchen like nothing was wrong, humming softly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. She was wearing that same perfume again, the one that hadn't been part of her routine until recently. It lingered in the air, sweet and suffocating. I watched her from the kitchen table, trying to keep my face neutral, but every small movement she made was like a reminder of the texts I had seen the night before. She didn't look guilty. In fact, she looked relaxed, her eyes bright, her smile easy as she asked me about my plans for the day. I answered on autopilot, my mind barely keeping up with the conversation. I kept waiting for some kind of sign, some crack in her facade, but nothing came. She was acting like the same woman I'd spent the last 28 years with, but everything felt different. "I'm heading into work early today," she said, placing her empty coffee cup in the sink. "They asked me to cover a shift for one of the nurses who called in sick." My heart skipped a beat. Early shift. Was she telling the truth, or was this just another excuse to sneak off and meet him? "Oh, okay," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I might swing by the hardware store later. That damn faucet in the bathroom still won't stop leaking." She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be back around dinner. Maybe we can order in tonight." "Yeah," I muttered, watching her closely as she grabbed her bag and phone from the counter. "Sounds good." As soon as she left the house, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me. I couldn't sit around and pretend like everything was fine. I had to know for sure. I had to find out if she was really meeting David or if my gut was just playing tricks on me. So I grabbed my keys and followed her. I'd never done anything like this before, but the gnawing need to know the truth outweighed the guilt of sneaking around behind her. I kept a safe distance as I drove, making sure she wouldn't notice me in the rearview mirror. My heart pounded in my chest, the tension in my body growing with every turn she took. Where was she going? Was she really heading to the hospital, or was this some elaborate cover? After about 10 minutes, I realized she wasn't driving toward the hospital. Instead, she was heading out of town, toward the outskirts. The roads became quieter, the scenery shifting from busy streets to long stretches of farmland and trees. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. This wasn't her usual route. I followed her down a narrow road lined with trees, my heart racing. It didn't take long for her to pull into a gravel driveway. I slowed my car and stopped just before the entrance, parking behind a line of trees where I could watch without being seen. She had pulled up to a small house, nothing fancy, just a modest place tucked away from the main road. And then I saw him, David. He stepped out of the house, walking toward her car with a casual confidence that made my blood boil. He was younger than me, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair and that easy, relaxed way of carrying himself. Evelyn stepped out of the car, and my heart dropped as they greeted each other. It wasn't just a friendly hello. It was familiar, intimate. The way she smiled at him, the way his hand rested lightly on her back as they walked toward the house, told me everything I needed to know. I stayed frozen in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. There it was, the truth I had been dreading. My wife wasn't just sneaking off for some innocent reason. She was meeting him, David. They disappeared inside the house, and I sat there for a few minutes, my mind racing. What now? I had seen enough to know she was having an affair, but part of me wanted more proof, as if seeing them go inside together wasn't already enough of a betrayal. But I knew that if I barged in now, I'd only make things worse. I needed to think. I drove back home, my stomach churning. My mind was flooded with memories of our life together, our wedding day, the birth of our kids, the vacations we took, the ordinary moments we shared over coffee in the mornings. All of it felt tainted now, like I'd been living a lie. By the time I got back to the house, I felt sick. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the half-eaten breakfast still sitting there. The perfume still lingered in the air, a reminder of the person Evelyn had become, someone I didn't recognize anymore. But I couldn't just sit there. I had to do something. So I picked up the phone and called the one person I knew would understand, my best friend Jack. Jack and I had been friends since high school. He was the kind of guy who never sugarcoated anything, but he was loyal to a fault. We'd been through a lot together over the years, and if there was anyone who could help me figure out what to do next, it was him. "Jack, it's me," I said when he answered. My voice sounded hoarse, like I'd been shouting, though I hadn't said much of anything all morning. Phil, you okay? You sound off. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. It's Evelyn. I think she's having an affair. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. What makes you say that? I followed her this morning, I admitted, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. She said she was going to work, but she wasn't. She went to see some guy. I've suspected something for a while, and I found some texts. Now I know for sure. Christ, Phil. Jack let out a long breath. I'm sorry, man. That's brutal. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice breaking. I've been married to her for 28 years, Jack. How the hell did we get here? Jack was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. You need to confront her, Phil. You can't let this go on without saying something. But don't go in guns blazing. You need to stay calm, figure out what you want before you make any big decisions. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, you're right. I don't know what I'm going to say. You'll figure it out, Jack said, his voice reassuring. But don't wait too long. The longer you sit on this, the worse it's going to get. We talked for a little longer, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment I saw Evelyn and David together over and over again. By the time I hung up, I knew what I had to do. Jack was right. I couldn't sit on this any longer. I needed to confront her. That evening when Evelyn came home, I was waiting for her in the living room. She walked in, smiling like she always did. But when she saw me sitting there, her smile faltered. Phil, she said, her voice cautious, what's going on? I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to talk. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a brief moment, I saw fear flash across her face. She knew what was coming. About what? She asked, her voice steady but her hands trembling. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. About David, about where you've really been going. Her face went pale. Evelyn's face drained of color, and for a moment it was like I was staring at a stranger. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The guilt was written all over her face, plain as day. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that I knew her secret. She sat down slowly, her hands clutching the arms of the chair, as if bracing herself. Phil, you don't have to explain, I interrupted, my voice low but firm. I know. I followed you this morning. I saw you with him. She blinked rapidly, her face contorting between shock and panic. For a few seconds, the room was filled with a tense silence. I could almost hear her thoughts racing, trying to find a way to salvage this, to explain what I had seen. I didn't want you to find out like this, she finally said, her voice trembling. I was going to tell you, Phil. I swear I was going to tell you, but Tell me what? I cut her off again, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. That you've been sneaking around with him? That you've been lying to my face every single day? Do you know what it felt like sitting here, wondering where you were and who you were with while you were... I couldn't finish the sentence. It felt like bile rising in my throat. Her hands shook as she clasped them together, her eyes welling up with tears. It's not what you think. I let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room, the tension in my body tightening with every word. Really? Because what I think is that you're cheating on me, Evelyn. What I think is that the woman I've been married to for almost 30 years has been carrying on with another man, and now you're going to stand there and try to tell me it's not what it looks like. She stood up quickly, wiping at her tears, her voice rising in desperation. It's not that simple, Phil. It's more complicated than you think. Complicated? I spun around to face her, my fists clenched at my sides. I don't think it gets any more simple than this. You lied to me. You've been seeing him behind my back, and now you're going to stand there and try to make excuses? Evelyn stepped toward me, her voice shaky but pleading. I wasn't looking for this. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Her words cut through me like a knife. It just happened? That's your explanation? She ran a hand through her hair, her breath coming in short, quick bursts. You don't understand. David, he's been there for me, in ways that I didn't realize I needed. We started talking, really talking, and I didn't even see it happening at first. It wasn't about you, Phil. It wasn't about us. Wasn't about us, I echoed, incredulous. How can you say that? Everything we've built, everything we've shared, it was supposed to be about us. But you turned to him. She lowered her gaze, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know. I'm sorry, Phil. I really am. But I felt lost. For months, I felt like I'm just going through the motions. The kids are gone, the house is quiet, and I didn't know who I was anymore. I swallowed hard, my anger mixing with confusion and hurt. I had felt the same thing, the quiet, the emptiness after the kids left, but I never thought it would drive a wedge between us like this. So you found him? I asked, my voice breaking. You found someone else to talk to instead of coming to me? She shook her head, sobbing now. It wasn't like that at first. It started as just a friendship, someone I could confide in. He listened, he understood, and I got caught up in it. I didn't realize how far it had gone until it was too late. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. A friendship. That was how it always started, wasn't it? A harmless conversation, a shared moment of vulnerability, and before you knew it, lines had been crossed. I sat down heavily, rubbing my temples as I tried to make sense of it all. So what now? I asked quietly. Where does this leave us? Evelyn wiped her face with the back of her hand, her voice trembling. I don't want to lose you, Phil. I know I messed up. I should have come to you. I should have talked to you, but I didn't, and I regret it. But I still love you. I want to fix this. I let out a long, shaky breath, the anger and sadness warring inside me. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to throw her words back in her face and tell her it was too late. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I was too hurt, too angry to think straight. Do you still love him? I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She looked at me, startled, and then shook her head fiercely. No, I don't love him. It was never about that. I've never stopped loving you, Phil. It got messy. I got lost in the moment, but I don't love him. I never did. I sat there staring at the floor, trying to process her words. Could I believe her? Could I trust that this was just a mistake, something we could work through? Or was this the end of everything we had built together? Evelyn took a step closer, her voice softer now. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll go to counseling. I'll cut all contact with him. I'll do anything. But please, please don't give up on us. I looked up at her, my heart heavy with indecision. This woman, the one standing before me, had betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. But she was also the woman I had spent nearly my entire life with, the woman I had loved through good times and bad. Could I just walk away? I need time, I said finally, my voice hoarse. I can't decide right now. I need to think. She nodded, relief flooding her face. I understand. Take as much time as you need. Just don't shut me out, Phil, please. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I stood up and walked out of the living room, heading upstairs to the guest room. I needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. As I lay in the bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the years we had spent together, the life we had built, the love we had shared. And now, this betrayal that had cracked everything open. I didn't know if we could come back from this, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed were like walking through a fog. Everything felt muted. My thoughts, my emotions, even the house itself seemed quieter, as though the walls were holding their breath, waiting for me to make a decision. Evelyn tiptoed around me, giving me space while I tried to process everything. She kept her promise, though. She didn't reach for her phone like she used to, didn't disappear for hours without an explanation. But it didn't change the fact that every time I looked at her, all I could think about was David. The thought of her with him, talking to him, confiding in him, God knows what else, made me sick. It wasn't just the act itself that hurt. It was the secrecy, the fact that she had turned to someone else when she should have come to me. One evening, about a week after our confrontation, I found myself at Jack's house, sitting on his back porch with a beer in my hand. Jack had always been my go-to guy whenever things went south in life, and this situation was no different. We hadn't spoken much since that first phone call when I told him about Evelyn, but tonight, I needed to talk. I can't wrap my head around it, I said, staring out at the fading sunset. I mean, 28 years, Jack. That's my whole adult life. How do you come back from something like this? Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. I wish I had some magic answer, man, but I don't. What she did was wrong. No two ways about it. But the real question is, can you see yourself moving past it? Can you ever trust her again? I took a long swig of my beer, the bitter taste doing little to ease the knot in my stomach. That's the thing. I don't know. Every time I think about trying to forgive her, trying to work it out, I keep picturing them together. It's like I can't stop my brain from going there. Jack nodded, his gaze steady. Yeah, I get that. You've been blindsided, Phil. It's like she took the foundation you built your life on and just cracked it wide open. But you gotta ask yourself, what do you want? Are you willing to fight for this, or is it too far gone? I stared down at the bottle in my hand, the condensation making it slippery. Part of me wants to walk away, just pack up and leave and never look back. But then I think about all the years we've spent together. I think about the good times, the kids, everything we built. And I wonder, am I throwing all of that away because of this one thing? Or am I just fooling myself, thinking we can fix it? Jack let out a heavy sigh. It's a tough call. I've seen guys walk away and start over, but I've also seen people work through worse. The thing is, man, it's got to be about what you can live with. Can you see yourself moving past this, rebuilding that trust? Or is this always going to hang over your head? I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of Jack's words sink in. I had spent so long thinking about what Evelyn had done, about how she had hurt me, that I hadn't really thought about what came next. Was I willing to try and rebuild? Or was this the end? I haven't made up my mind yet, I admitted, my voice quiet. I told her I needed time, and she's been giving me space. But I don't know how long I can keep living like this, Jack. It's like everything I thought I knew about my life has been ripped away. Jack took a deep breath, leaning forward. Look, Phil, you've got history with Evelyn. 28 years is nothing to scoff at. But don't stay just because it's familiar. Stay because you still love her. Because you believe you can build something better out of this mess. His words echoed in my mind as I drove home that night. It was strange, hearing it put so simply. Stay because you love her. But that was the problem. I did still love her, despite everything. And that love was what made this decision so damn hard. When I got home, the house was dark. Evelyn was already in bed, but I wasn't ready to face her yet. I sat in the living room for a long time, staring at the empty space where we used to sit together. The place where we'd talk about our days, laugh about small things, plan our future. Everything had changed. The next morning, Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She glanced up as I walked in, her eyes red from crying. We hadn't spoken much in the past few days, but I could see the weight of guilt still pressing down on her. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Phil, she said softly, her voice tentative, I know I've given you space, but I need to know where we stand. I'm trying to do everything I can to make this right, but I need to know if we even have a chance. I sat down across from her, the weight of her question settling heavily between us. The truth was, I didn't have an answer, not yet. I still felt the sting of her betrayal, the anger and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. But I couldn't deny that part of me still wanted to try. I wasn't ready to walk away, even if the road ahead looked impossible. I've been thinking about it, I said quietly, choosing my words carefully. And I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you. Not yet, but I do know that I don't want to throw away 28 years of our life without at least trying to fix this. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent, waiting for me to continue. I'm willing to go to counseling, I said, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. But it's going to take a lot of work, Evelyn. A lot of work. And I need to know that you're willing to be honest with me from here on out. No more lies. No more secrets. If we're going to fix this, we have to be all in, both of us. She nodded quickly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm all in, Phil. I swear. I'll do whatever it takes. I know I've hurt you, and I can't take that back, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I looked at her, trying to gauge whether or not I could trust those words. She looked broken, but sincere. And maybe that was a start. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the weight of everything still hanging between us. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the cold, heavy silence of betrayal. It was the silence of something fragile, something that could either shatter or slowly mend. The next few weeks were awkward, but we started taking small steps toward healing. Counseling sessions were hard, forcing us to confront the cracks that had been in our marriage long before David came into the picture. We talked about the loneliness we both felt after the kids moved out, the ways we had drifted apart without even realizing it. And while it didn't excuse what she had done, it helped me understand why she had turned to someone else. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiving. I wasn't there yet. One night after one of our counseling sessions, Evelyn sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting lightly on my arm. I want to ask you something, she said softly. Yeah? Do you think we can ever get back to where we were, before all of this? I sighed, staring down at my hands. I don't know if we'll ever be what we were before. Too much has changed. But maybe we can find something better. She looked at me, her eyes full of hope. I'd like that. I didn't respond, but I nodded, knowing that there was still a long road ahead. I wasn't ready to say that everything would be okay. I wasn't ready to say that the trust had been fully rebuilt, but I was willing to keep trying. For now, that was enough. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about Jack's words, about building something better out of the mess. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. Weeks passed, and though things remained tense between us, I could sense a subtle shift. Evelyn and I were trying, really trying, to find our way back to each other. But it was like walking through a minefield. Every conversation felt careful, as though one wrong word could send us both spiraling back into the bitterness that had defined the first days after I found out about the affair. Counseling helped, but it was slow, painfully slow. The sessions dredged up a lot of uncomfortable truths, things we hadn't talked about in years. There were cracks in our marriage long before David came along, cracks we'd ignored as we raised our kids and went through the motions of daily life. It became clear that Evelyn's betrayal, while devastating, was just the tipping point. There were deeper problems between us, ones that had been festering beneath the surface for years. The counselor pushed us to confront those problems head-on. For the first time in years, we talked about the things we had avoided. How I buried myself in work after the kids left. How Evelyn felt invisible at home. How we both silently accepted that our marriage was fine without doing anything to nurture it. It wasn't easy. Some nights after counseling, I'd come home and find myself sitting in the car, staring at the steering wheel, wondering if it was all worth it. Part of me still wanted to walk away, to start fresh without the baggage of the betrayal hanging over my head. But every time I thought about leaving, I'd remember the life we had built together. The kids, the years of shared memories, the small moments of joy that still clung to the edges of my mind. And I'd tell myself to give it more time. Evelyn was trying too. She was more open now, more vulnerable. She stopped using her phone as a shield, and I could tell she was genuinely working to rebuild the trust she had shattered. It wasn't just words. It was in the little things, checking in with me during the day, making an effort to be present when we were together. Slowly, I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. But the ghost of David still lingered in the background. No matter how hard I tried to focus on rebuilding with Evelyn, I couldn't escape the thoughts of him, what they had shared, what she had felt for him that she hadn't felt with me. One night, after a particularly grueling counseling session, Evelyn and I sat on the couch together, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. It was late, and the house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. We hadn't talked much after the session. We were both too exhausted, emotionally drained from dredging up old wounds. I glanced over at her, watching as she absent-mindedly twisted her wedding ring around her finger. She did that when she was nervous, and tonight, there was an edge to her nervousness that I couldn't ignore. "There's something I need to tell you," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped a beat, and for a second, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My mind instantly jumped to the worst-case scenario. Had she been lying to me this whole time? Had the affair with David continued, even after everything we'd been through? "I don't know how to say this, but I think you deserve to know," she continued, her eyes fixed on her lap. "David, he reached out to me." I sat up, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean he reached out to you?" "He texted me a few days ago," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't respond. I blocked his number right away, but I didn't want to hide it from you. I knew if I did, it would only make things worse." I stared at her, trying to keep my anger in check. "What did he say?" She pulled out her phone, unlocking it and showing me the message. There it was, David's name followed by a short, simple message. "I miss you, can we talk?" I clenched my jaw, the sight of his name bringing back all the feelings of betrayal and anger I had been trying so hard to push down. "Why is he still contacting you, Evelyn? I thought you said it was over." "It is," she insisted, her eyes pleading with me to believe her. "I haven't spoken to him since you found out. I blocked him everywhere and I don't want anything to do with him, but he must have found another way to reach me. I'm telling you because I don't want there to be any more secrets." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The rational part of me knew she was doing the right thing by telling me, but it didn't make the pain any easier to swallow. David had already stolen so much from us, and now he was trying to worm his way back in. The thought of him trying to rekindle whatever they had made my blood boil. "What does he want?" I asked, my voice tight with anger. "I don't know, and I don't care. she said, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. I'm done with him. I wanted you to know so you don't think I'm hiding anything. I stared at her, trying to read her expression, trying to gauge if she was telling the truth. She looked genuinely distraught, her hands trembling slightly as she held the phone out to me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. She wasn't hiding anything. She was scared, scared that I would think she was still involved with him, scared that this would be the thing that finally pushed me over the edge. I appreciate you telling me, I said finally, my voice softer now. But this changes things. Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. What do you mean? I mean, I can't keep pretending that we can move forward without really addressing what happened, I said, standing up and pacing the room. We've been doing all this work in counseling, trying to rebuild trust, but I haven't let myself fully confront how much this hurt me. And now, with him still trying to contact you, I can't ignore that. She stood up too, her voice shaky. Phil, I swear to you, I've cut him out of my life completely. I can't control what he does, but I can promise you that I want nothing to do with him. I know, I said, turning to face her, but that doesn't change the fact that what happened between you and him, is still hanging over us. I've been trying to move on, but the truth is, I don't know if I can. Every time I think about what you two shared, it eats me up inside. Her face crumpled, and she stepped toward me, her voice pleading. I'll do anything, Phil. I'll change my number. I'll leave the hospital. I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm committed to us. Just tell me what you need. I stared at her, my mind racing. What did I need? Could I really move past this, or was it time to accept that the damage was too deep, the wound too raw to heal? I had spent weeks telling myself that we could rebuild, that love and time would eventually smooth over the cracks. But now, with David still lurking in the background, I wasn't so sure. I don't know, I said finally, my voice breaking. I don't know what I need, but I can't keep pretending that everything's fine. It's not. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully trust you again, and that's not something I can fix overnight. Evelyn's tears spilled over, and she nodded slowly, her face full of sorrow. I understand. I'm begging you not to give up on us. I know I've broken your trust, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back if that's what it takes. We stood there in the middle of the living room, both of us exhausted from the emotional weight of everything we'd been through. I didn't know what to say, what decision to make. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in this limbo, torn between the life we had built and the betrayal that had shattered it. I need more time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need more time to figure out if this is something I can live with. Evelyn nodded, wiping her tears. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I walked out of the room, feeling the weight of the decision still looming over me. I didn't know what the future held for us, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. The days after Evelyn's confession were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Every morning, I'd wake up feeling the weight of it all bearing down on me. David's message, the months of betrayal, and the questions I couldn't answer about our future. Evelyn did everything she could to give me space, but I could feel her anxiety like a shadow lingering in the house. I was still in limbo, torn between the life I wanted to save and the pain I wasn't sure I could live with. I spent a lot of time in the garage, tinkering with small projects, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind distracted. I needed time to think, but I wasn't sure what I was even thinking about anymore. Was I trying to forgive her? Or was I just delaying the inevitable end of something that was already broken beyond repair? One evening, after another silent dinner, I found myself sitting in the backyard, staring up at the stars. It was a cool night, the kind that made me nostalgic for the years when things were simpler, when the kids were young, and Evelyn and I would sit on the same porch, talking for hours about the future, our dreams, our plans. Those moments felt so far away now, like they belonged to another life entirely. Evelyn came outside quietly, her steps hesitant. She hadn't pushed me to talk since that night, and I could see how much restraint it took for her to keep her distance. But tonight, she seemed different, like she had made peace with something, though I wasn't sure what. Mind if I sit with you? She asked softly. I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes cast down at the ground. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that comes after a long, exhausting storm, when there's nothing left to do but sit and wait for clarity. I've been thinking a lot, Evelyn said finally, breaking the quiet. Her voice was calm, steady. About us. About what I did. I didn't respond, just waited for her to continue. I hurt you in ways I never imagined, she said, her voice low. I took what we had and I broke it. And I know no matter what I do, no matter how much I try to make things right, it'll never be the same again. I turned to look at her, my heart heavy with the truth of her words. I've asked myself over and over why I did it, she continued, her eyes glistening in the dim light. Why I turned to David instead of you. And the truth is, it wasn't about him. It was about me. I felt lost, like I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The kids were gone, you were working so much, and I felt invisible. But that doesn't excuse what I did. It never will. I stayed silent, letting her words sink in. It was the first time she had really said it out loud, admitting that she had broken something in our marriage that might never fully heal. I want you to know, she continued, her voice soft but firm, that if you decide this is the end, I'll understand. I won't fight you on it. I've thought a lot about this, and I realize that holding on to something out of fear or guilt isn't going to fix anything. If you can't trust me again, if you can't see a future for us, then it's okay to walk away. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected her to keep fighting, to keep pleading for forgiveness, but this was different. She wasn't begging anymore. She was giving me permission to leave. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in months, I saw the depth of her regret, the weight of the pain she had caused. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the same way I had been. I wasn't full of rage or resentment. I was just tired of carrying the burden of what she had done, tired of feeling stuck between the past and the future. I've thought about leaving, I admitted, my voice low. A lot. I've thought about packing up and starting over, just walking away from all of this. Evelyn nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I know. But the thing is, I continued, every time I think about leaving, I can't picture my life without you. Even after everything that's happened, I still see you, us, our life together. And maybe that's what's keeping me here. Or maybe I'm just afraid of starting over. She looked at me, her eyes full of hope, but also sadness. I don't want you to stay because you're afraid. I want you to stay because you believe we can build something new, something better. I don't know if we can, I said honestly, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if there's a way forward for us. But I need you to understand something, Evelyn. Things won't be the same. They'll never be the same. And I don't know how long it's going to take for me to fully trust you again. I understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I just want the chance to rebuild, to earn your trust again, even if it takes years. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. Then we'll take it one day at a time, I said quietly. We'll go to counseling, we'll keep talking, and we'll see where this takes us. But I'm not making any promises, Evelyn. If at any point I feel like this isn't working, I'm not going to force it. She nodded, wiping away her tears. That's all I can ask for. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us no longer heavy with anger or resentment, but with a quiet understanding. We both knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be moments of doubt, moments of pain, and moments where it felt like everything was falling apart again. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. As I stood up to head inside, Evelyn reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I squeezed back, feeling the warmth of her touch, the familiar connection that we had almost lost. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but we were still here, still standing, still trying. And for now, that was enough.